My son Matthew finally got married. And now, I hear there's a baby on the way. Matthew, who I used to worry so much about, is married. And now, I'm going to see the face of my grandchild, too. My husband Jason brought out a special bottle of wine, and the three of us toasted together. But then it happened. As I was eagerly anticipating the arrival of my first grandchild, my daughter-in-law Carol hit me with some shocking words. A dirty grandma who's a cleaning lady is a bad influence on our child, so we're cutting you off. A year has passed since we've been estranged. Now, Matthew says he's bringing his family to visit us. He's made up his mind. My name is Lisa Wilson, and I'm 72 years old. Until 2 years ago, I worked as a certified architect, but I retired when I turned 70. Now, I live a leisurely life in an upscale apartment in Manhattan, New York City, with my husband Jason, who's the same age as me. Jason was a skilled carpenter, but he retired at 65. When I was still working, he took cooking classes so he could prepare meals for me. Now, he's even better at cooking than I am. Jason spends his free time building plastic model kits, a hobby of his, and taking walks to stay healthy. As for me, I thought I would take it easy after retirement, but maybe because I've always been a bit of a workaholic, I couldn't sit still at home. So, a year ago, I signed up with a temp agency and started working as a cleaning lady in the city. Sometimes, I even come across buildings I was involved in designing, and I feel a deep affection for them, like they're my own children. I enjoy this job because it keeps me active and healthy. At work, I keep it a secret that I was once a certified architect earning $500,000 a year and that I now live in a high-end apartment. People's jealousy can be a hassle. So it's easier for them to think of me as an old woman who has to work even after turning 70. The only thing that bothers me is my 40-year-old son, Matthew. He works for a sporting goods company in the city. He's loved sports since he was a kid, played baseball in college as a shortstop, and still enjoys watching sports of all kinds. His job in sales at the sporting goods company suits him well. Matthew is single. He was supposed to get married 5 years ago, but he was deeply betrayed by his fiancée. To put it simply, the woman was only after his money. According to my son, her attitude changed after she found out he lived in a high-end apartment with his parents. She started spending money recklessly, asking about my and Jason's health, and the final straw was when Matthew overheard her talking to a man he didn't know about how they could live it up once the inheritance came through, since his parents were getting on in years. It was a messy breakup, but he managed to cut ties with her. "I can't marry someone who's just waiting for mom and dad to die." He said this with a wry smile, but I know the emotional damage he suffered was significant. Not long after that, Matthew moved out of the high-rise apartment and started living alone in a studio apartment. It was painful for Jason and me to think that the high-rise apartment had become a trauma for Matthew. 5 years have passed since then. We hadn't heard anything about marriage or even about him dating anyone. Marriage isn't everything, and as long as he's happy, that's all that matters. But I hoped he would find a partner he could spend his life with. We bought the high-rise apartment about 10 years ago. Before that, we lived in a detached house in a neighboring city of New York. It was a house left to us by Jason's parents, and it was comfortable, but as we got older, going up and down the stairs between the first and second floors became more challenging. One day, "Why don't we sell this house and spend our retirement in the city? I've always wanted to live in one of those high-rise apartments that are getting so much attention lately. They're convenient, and the security is good too," Jason suddenly said. Even though I had never designed a high-rise apartment myself, I was very interested. Living in the heart of New York would allow us to easily visit places like movie theaters and art museums, so I wouldn't have to worry about being bored after retirement. I also agreed with Jason's opinion, laughing as he said, "If we just sit around the house after retirement, we might get senile." So, we sold the house where we had lived for so many years and moved to a high-rise apartment in Manhattan, New York. As expected, the apartment was very comfortable, with a wide variety of commercial facilities and clinics on the lower floors, making it convenient to take care of most things without even leaving the building. We chose the apartment carefully, so its asset value is unlikely to decrease significantly. We even considered the possibility of selling it one day and moving to a retirement home together. Matthew visits us at least once a month, and we have dinner together. One day, when he came over, "Dad, Mom, the woman I've been seeing is pregnant, so we're getting married," he said. Jason and I were both shocked at first, but then we were overjoyed. Matthew, who had been a source of worry for us, was getting married. And on top of that, we would get to see the face of our grandchild. Jason brought out a special bottle of wine, and the three of us toasted together. The woman he was marrying was Carol, a 35-year-old. They met when they were seated next to each other at a baseball game. They were cheering for the same team, and after an intense seesaw game, their team won with a walk-off home run in the final inning. That's when they decided to celebrate together. "It's great to have a shared hobby that you both enjoy," I said. At that moment, I imagined Matthew, wearing a baseball cap, taking his child to a game with Carol, the three of them enjoying the day together as a family. The thought filled me with happiness. Then Matthew said, "So, there's something I'd like to ask. Could you keep it a secret that you and Dad live in a high-rise apartment for a while?" "It's not that I don't trust her." It was clear that his previous experience had left him deeply scarred. "Of course, if that's what you want. It's not like we have to keep it a secret forever," I reassured him. "Yeah, thanks. Once the baby is born, I'll be able to bring them here." The thought of that filled me with genuine anticipation. Matthew and Carol discussed it between themselves, and given their ages, they decided not to have a wedding. Instead, they would just take some photos and throw a party. Matthew told us that there wouldn't be a formal meeting between the two families and that greetings could be exchanged at the party itself. It seems that more couples are opting for this relaxed approach to marriage these days. It made sense to me. Why spend a lot of money on a wedding when there will be plenty of expenses once the baby arrives? It seemed like a practical decision. When I finally met Matthew's wife, the woman he introduced at the party, she struck me as a strong-willed and straightforward person. Since Matthew is more laid-back and a bit timid, I thought it might be good for him to have a partner who was more assertive. Carol's parents were also relatively young, both under 60, and still working. What caught my attention, though, was when Carol asked, "So, Jason and Lisa don't work anymore?" I replied, "Jason doesn't, but I work part-time as a building cleaner." Her expression changed as she repeated, "A cleaner?" It was as if she looked down on the job. Matthew and Carol began living in a 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, close to Carol's parents. She said she feels safer being near her family while she's pregnant. "My commute has gotten a bit tougher, though," Matthew said, already giving off the vibe of someone under her control. "Well, a household runs smoothly when the husband is a bit under the wife's thumb," Jason remarked. "Oh, really? And when exactly have I ever controlled you?" I shot back, teasingly. "Well, it's in moments like this, Lisa," Jason replied with a laugh. We all laughed along, but over time, that laughter began to fade. The next time Matthew came to visit our high-rise apartment, I noticed he looked noticeably gaunt. "She's been having a tough time with morning sickness and spends most of the day lying down. I've been taking care of all the housework. Not that I mind, but," he said with a wry smile, When times are tough, it's normal for couples to support each other. But morning sickness usually subsides by the 7th month, right? She should be in the stable period by now, and typically, the nausea eases off. Yeah, but she says she feels really weak and looks like she's not feeling well. Everyone's different, so I can't say for sure, but if she doesn't move around at all, it might make the delivery harder. Maybe you should consult a doctor. I couldn't help but offer some advice, driven by my strong desire for the safe birth of my grandchild. A while later, when I contacted Matthew again, it seemed my advice hadn't been taken. He told me that Carol might need to be hospitalized due to preeclampsia. Worried, I rushed to their apartment. Carol had noticeably gained weight. Probably over 40 pounds. Carol, you've gained too much weight. Preeclampsia is serious. Even now, you should change your lifestyle, pay attention to your diet, and start doing some gentle exercise. I said this out of genuine concern, but it seemed to hit a nerve with Carol. What are you saying all of a sudden? I need extra nutrients for the baby, and it's normal to gain some weight. She snapped back at me. That idea of eating for two is outdated. Nowadays, the common advice is to eat a balanced diet and avoid excessive weight gain. Matthew, caught in the middle, looked flustered, not sure whose side to take. Carol, you'll be 36 by the time the baby is born, right? That counts as a high-risk pregnancy. You have to be much more careful than younger mothers. Maybe I had said too much. Why do you keep saying things that make me anxious? Just go home. She practically kicked me out. Matthew walked me out of the apartment, and I apologized. I'm sorry if I went too far. But I'm really worried. I know, Mom. I'll smooth things over, so please, you and Dad don't worry. Matthew reassured me, but a few weeks later, Carol ended up being hospitalized due to preeclampsia. I considered visiting her, but Matthew advised against it. She's really irritable because the hospital food is terrible, he said. Of course, a low-sodium diet wouldn't be appetizing. But that's the consequence of eating whatever she wanted and being inactive. All I could do was pray that everything would turn out okay and that I would get to meet my grandchild. Perhaps those prayers were answered because, after about 10 days, Carol was discharged from the hospital. She seemed to be taking better care of herself, and eventually, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. When Matthew told us the news, Jason and I clasped hands and rejoiced. We rushed to the hospital to meet our grandson. Thank you for letting us meet him. You did a great job, I said, trying to express my gratitude to Carol. But she replied, I didn't have him for you and Jason. There's a common saying that daughter-in-laws and mother-in-laws don't get along, but I never thought that would apply to me. However, to my daughter-in-law, I might have just seemed like a nagging mother-in-law. I felt disappointed and disheartened. Still, when I heard from Matthew that Carol and my grandson had been discharged from the hospital, Jason and I brought a gift and visited their apartment. When I saw my newborn grandson, he was so tiny and incredibly adorable. It brought back memories of when Matthew was born, and I couldn't hold back my tears. As I gently reached out to touch my grandson's hand. Hey! Don't touch him with those dirty hands! Carol suddenly yelled at me. She must have seen me washing my hands thoroughly in the bathroom when we arrived. Come on, there's no need to speak like that, Matthew said, reprimanding her. Whose side are you on? She snapped back. It's not about taking sides. Dad, Mom, Carol, and our newborn baby, we're all important family. Matthew tried to reason. Excuse me? What are you talking about? Of course, your wife and your child are the most important. They started arguing intensely right in front of us. All right, both of you, calm down. I tried to intervene, but Carol, now furious, lashed out at me. Shut up! Whose fault do you think this is? It was shocking to hear such harsh words directed at us, her in-laws. She continued, her voice rising. A dirty cleaning lady grandma is a bad influence on my child, so we're cutting ties. Carol screamed hysterically. I was so stunned by her words that I fell silent. You're right. Seeing this isn't good for your grandchild. Jason sighed deeply and said, Yes, that's true. Carol, is that all you wanted to say? Carol didn't respond. I still deeply hurt. Jason and I left Matthew and Carol's apartment with heavy hearts. After discussing it, Jason and I decided to stay away from Matthew and his wife for a while. As more time passed, I hoped that things might eventually improve. In the meantime, I found comfort in the photos of my grandson that Matthew sent through WhatsApp. He had started crawling, and recently, he even managed to stand up while holding onto something. He was irresistibly adorable. The cuter he looked in those photos, the more I longed to hold him in my arms, which was tough to bear. What concerned me, though, was that all the photos Matthew sent were of the baby alone. Normally, wouldn't parents take turns holding the baby in photos? Jason and I began to worry that their marriage might not be going well. As our grandson's first birthday approached, Matthew reached out to us. He said that the three of them would be coming over on Sunday. Did you tell Carol about the high-rise apartment? I asked. They wouldn't be visiting unless she knew. Yeah, I told her about the apartment, and also that you were a former licensed architect and made quite a lot of money. But she didn't believe me, so we're coming over to show her. It didn't seem like they were coming because their marriage was going well, or because Carol's attitude had softened, or because they thought they could get along better with us as grandparents. Matthew must have his own reasons. Though I had questions, I decided to wait and see what Sunday would bring. Wow! No way! It's true! Carol exclaimed as soon as she stepped inside the apartment, her voice filled with excitement. She had gained even more weight since the last time we saw her. Oh my gosh! This is amazing! It's so spacious! How many rooms are there? And the view is incredible! It's the 30th floor, right? Fantastic! Without even greeting Jason or me, Carol started exploring the apartment on her own. Meanwhile, Jason and I were completely absorbed in taking turns holding our grandson. Just watching him sleep peacefully brought a smile to our faces. But then, he woke up and started crying. Maybe the unfamiliar surroundings startled him, or perhaps he was hungry. Carol, the baby's crying. Do you think he needs milk? However, Carol didn't seem to hear the baby's cries at all. There. Don't cry. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Carol said to Matthew, in a tone more affectionate than I'd ever heard from her before. Lisa, you shouldn't have lied about being a cleaning lady. You were actually making a lot of money, right? You were a licensed architect or something? She even began to act all sweet towards me, leaning in with a smile. I really did work as a cleaning lady, I replied. Wow, that's unusual. If I had that kind of money and lived in a place like this, I'd spend every day living it up. It was as if she was openly declaring herself a lazy person. Carol, getting carried away, said something fatal. When Jason and Lisa die, this high-rise apartment will become ours, right? No, it won't. What? Carol asked, surprised by Matthew's cold reply. I'm going to divorce you. I'll get custody of the child. What are you talking about all of a sudden? Stop making bad jokes. This isn't a joke. I've tolerated you neglecting housework and childcare. That's right. You should be grateful that I gave birth to your child, especially since you're a dull man in your 40s. She wasn't exactly young herself, so what she said was completely nonsensical. But I can't live with someone who looks forward to my parents' death. I never. Do you know why I didn't tell you about the high-rise apartment or my mom's job? What? And do you know why I brought you here today? Matthew's voice was heavy with sadness. What are you saying? This child is mine. There's no way I'm giving up custody. Okay, I understand. Then I'll pay child support, but please divorce me. Are you saying I should become a single mother and live in an apartment? No way. We don't need to get divorced. We can just all live together in this high-rise apartment. This exchange made it clear that she wanted the apartment more than custody of the child. Matthew likely brought Carol here to give her one last chance. For the sake of the child, it would be best if they didn't divorce. If Carol had shown even a bit of consideration towards us, his parents, Matthew might not have thought about divorce. But once words are spoken, they can't be taken back. Once Matthew made up his mind, he remained firm, even when Carol tried every trick in the book to sway him with tears. Finally, Matthew said to the still unyielding Carol, I have video evidence of you not doing any housework or childcare, and I've recorded your words and actions since we arrived here. What? You're a lying, sneaky coward. You're the worst. Carol turned pale. In that case, let's discuss this through our lawyers. But Carol, I haven't forgotten that you told me not to touch my grandson with my dirty hands and that you cut us off. Exactly. You were the one who said you wanted nothing to do with us, so it's too late now to say you want to live together. When Jason and I said this, Carol collapsed to her knees, unable to respond. Muttering complaints with a resentful look, she left the room. And so, Jason and I began living with Matthew and our grandchild, the four of us together in the high-rise apartment. For a while, Matthew was downcast, saying, Why am I so bad at picking women? I'm sorry. It's my fault for saying I wanted to live in a high-rise apartment in the first place, Jason said, even though it wasn't really his fault. I understood why he might feel responsible. Well, it's just bad luck. Just a coincidence that you had two bad experiences in a row. You'll find the right person someday, I reassured him. No, it's fine. I have my son, and Dad and Mom are in good health. I'm happy enough. But Matthew replied with a slightly sad smile. Carol returned to her parents' house after divorcing Matthew, but her parents were fed up with how she kept leaving her newborn behind to go out and party. They also discovered she had debts and scolded her, saying she couldn't stay with them if she didn't work. However, she had gained so much weight that it was hard to find a job. Ironically, she ended up working as a cleaner, a job she had looked down on, while being treated as an incompetent older woman. Given her previous attitude, it's no wonder her colleagues disliked her. Matthew occasionally received messages from Carol asking to reconcile, but he now ignores them without even reading them. Jason and I were overjoyed to be able to live with our grandchild, but taking care of a baby in our 70s was far more challenging than we had imagined. A grandchild is adorable when you only see them for a few hours at a time, but we had forgotten how demanding raising a child could be. I came to realize how amazing it was that Matthew had been managing both work and childcare for a year while his wife had all but abandoned her responsibilities. Are you sure you're not too tired, Dad and Mom? Why don't we hire a babysitter? Matthew suggested, and we decided to take him up on it. A 36-year-old single mother named Susan started coming to help with our grandchild from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. on weekdays. She's the mother of a 10-year-old daughter and a 7-year-old son. As a mother in the midst of raising her own children, Susan is incredibly efficient and hardworking. As the breadwinner, she's very diligent. She even makes lunch for Jason and me, and sometimes we cook and eat together. This 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. schedule really helps me. I can get my kids off to school, come here to work, do some shopping, and still make it home in time to prepare dinner," she said, clearly pleased with the arrangement. She mentioned that she lives with her 2 children and they all work together to manage the household. Over time, we became quite close, and she shared with us that she divorced her husband because he was addicted to gambling and showed no signs of changing. She doesn't receive any child support or alimony. Susan is a bright and wonderful woman with a strong spirit. Jason and I grew very fond of her, so we invited her and her children to come over for a meal on one of her days off, a Sunday. Susan was delighted to accept our invitation. "Are you sure? When I told my kids that I work at a high-rise apartment, they were so envious. They've been saying they'd love to visit." Susan's children were well-mannered, energetic, and adorable, and they quickly became friends with our nearly 2-year-old grandchild. "This high-rise apartment is amazing. The cars look so tiny from up here." The kids were thrilled and excited, and it was a joy to watch them. The younger boy was fascinated by Jason's collection of plastic model kits, and Jason, pleased, showed him various robots and fighter planes, clearly enjoying himself. Since Susan had weekends off, it was the first time she met Matthew. They greeted each other with a polite "nice to meet you." "Thank you for taking care of my son and my parents." And Matthew added, "Thank you for the opportunity." Susan replied, and they both laughed, commenting on how this situation felt a bit strange. The truth is, the reason Jason and I invited Susan and her children over was to introduce her to our son. Jason and I had both thought, wouldn't she make a wonderful daughter-in-law? However, we didn't want to force anything, so after introducing them, we decided to leave it to them to see where things might go. Susan already knew some of our situation, as she was helping take care of our young grandchild. "I can't believe there's a mother who wouldn't want to care for such an adorable child," she had said, surprised. Matthew and Susan were sitting on the living room chairs, watching the children play. "There's something nice about this, the sound of children laughing," Matthew said thoughtfully. "Yes, it's wonderful. And it's so lovely to see a couple like your parents cooking together," Susan replied. Since the kitchen was open concept, Jason and I could hear their conversation. "Dad started taking cooking classes after he retired to help out Mom, who was still working," Matthew revealed, making Jason a bit bashful. "That's wonderful. I always wanted to have a marriage like that, but I failed," Susan admitted. "Me too," Matthew responded. I exchanged a glance with Jason, signaling that things were going well. And he nodded in agreement. Susan, have you ever thought about living in a high-rise apartment?" Matthew suddenly asked, diving right into the heart of the matter. Jason and I tensed up a bit at the directness of his question. "Well, this place is lovely, but I think it's more important who you live with than where you live," Susan answered, likely giving the perfect response. At that moment, I was sure that Matthew had fallen in love. After that, Susan and her children started visiting us on weekends, and the 4 of them, including our grandchild, would go out together. They looked just like a happy, long-time married couple and their children. Perhaps Susan, being a smart woman, sensed Matthew's past traumas and managed to connect with him in a way that healed his heart. If that were the case, I thought, then it was a good thing. I believed that her intelligence would allow her to keep things together and build a happy family. About a year after we had all become so close, Matthew came to Jason and me with a serious expression. "I'm thinking of proposing to Susan. Do you think you and Dad would approve?" Jason and I exchanged glances and nodded. "It's about time, right, Jason?" "Yeah, I was wondering when you'd bring it up." "Of course, we approve." "Absolutely," I added. "Hey, can't you put the house in my name? I'm gonna get it when you die anyway, so we might as well change it now, right?" Vernon, my son, suggests nonchalantly. He's holding the deed to the 0.1-acre house he just purchased the other day, flapping it around and looking at me expectantly. "You see, that house is—" "Never mind all that, just hurry up and do the paperwork," he interrupts. Vernon grins from ear to ear, his arm around his wife's shoulder, looking mighty pleased with himself. His wife is smirking too. "Since you and Roseanne don't have much time left, we'll be the ones living there properly. We're letting you live with your grandkids, so you should be grateful," she says presumptuously, as if we asked for any of this. The couple snickers. They won't listen to a word I say. Even when I try to explain the situation with the property correctly, they brush it off as lies. Instead, Vernon points to the calendar and laughs. "We're moving in next week, so get ready to help us unpack." I had no choice but to hold back my laughter at his words. My name is Roseanne. And I'm turning 60 this year. Up until a few years ago, I was working part-time. However, when my father was diagnosed with terminal cancer, I quit my job to take care of him. Now, I live with my father in my childhood home. I have a husband named Abel who is 3 years older than me, but since I moved back home, he's been living almost alone in our house. With his nearing retirement age and not wanting to burden my sick father by moving in together, he decided to stay put. Abel, who I've been with for 40 years, has a very kind personality. Unlike most men his age, he helps out with housework and has been saving money for our retirement. But he has one flaw. He spoils our son, Vernon, too much. I married Abel when I was 20 years old. We had a happy marriage, but for many years we couldn't have children. After seeing doctors for a decade, we were finally blessed with a baby boy. I understand the desire to fulfill every wish of our long-awaited son, Vernon. However, indulging a child's every whim only leads to raising a selfish brat. Toys, sweets, allowance. Abel was lenient with him on all fronts. Of course, we had countless discussions about it as a couple. I tried to convince him that spoiling Vernon wasn't good for him. Each time, he would apologize with a guilty look and vow to do better starting tomorrow. But his determination was all talk. In the end, he'd always cave to Vernon's wheedling and buy him whatever he wanted. To try and maintain some balance, I was strict with Vernon to make up for Abel's leniency. No playing with toys until homework was finished, no stuffing himself with sweets before dinner, no more allowance until next month if he used it all up. It was all basic stuff, but I suppose Vernon didn't find it very amusing. He was going through his rebellious and pubescent phases, but in Vernon's mind, Abel had become the Superman who could make anything happen, while I turned into the nagging mother. Once he reached high school, he started buying only prepared meals and bread from the school store or on his way home. Considering the appetite of a high school boy, it was understandable, so I didn't stop him. But I at least tried to balance his nutrition by including more vegetables in our meals at home. Then one day, he slammed his hand on the table and yelled, "Hey Mom, why the hell are you only serving veggies every day? Give me some meat." Meat. As I stood there feeling defeated from being called Mom to my face, Abel grabbed Vernon's shoulder firmly. "What's with that tone? Who do you think you are?" Perhaps being yelled at like that by Abel, who was usually lenient with him, was quite a shock. Vernon threw an apology my way in a small voice. After that, Vernon's rebellious phase seemed to settle down a bit. He even started studying hard, but unfortunately, he didn't get into his first choice school. He took several entrance exams and ended up enrolling in a university far away that accepted him. Moving preparations, carrying his belongings into the dorm, attending Vernon's entrance ceremony, that was the last memory we had as a family of 3. After starting college, Vernon stopped coming home. Maybe the city life was exciting, but whenever we contacted him, all we got was, "I'm busy with studying." Honestly, I even wondered if he was out partying, but constantly monitoring the behavior of a college student didn't seem right, so we were left feeling anxious. Even when we said we'd come to see him, it's never a good time. We tried showing up unannounced, but even after waiting all night, there was no sign of him coming back. In the end, we couldn't meet him. The only time Vernon came home was during the Christmas holidays of his first 2 years. Other than that, the only contact we got was him asking for more allowance because he didn't have enough money. Maybe all that studying paid off, because after graduating from university, Vernon was able to get a job at a fairly large company. When he finally came back, he said he was moving from the dorm to a place near his company and needed money to buy necessary appliances. It wasn't just a job report, but also a request for money. However, as a celebration for his graduation and new job, we gave him the money as a couple. But Vernon ended up quitting the big company he had just joined after only 2 weeks. "There are only ugly chicks there. I don't want to work surrounded by monsters with faces scoring 5 or less." I just couldn't accept him quitting for such a ridiculous reason. What do you think you're going to a company for? Selfishly rating people's faces, and then quitting for a reason like that. How pathetic. Yeah, whatever. And here I thought your son was finally gonna make it big and earn some dough. Aren't you ashamed of relying on your son's income? He was a complete stranger to me. His way of speaking and thinking was becoming more and more like the people he called his online friends. "But I can still work and I'll find a company with cuter girls," he said, frequently job hunting and getting hired quite often. He was originally a serious person with good social skills. Getting in was relatively easy, but sticking with it was the hard part. He never held the same job for more than 2 years. Everywhere he went, he complained about the female employees not being cute enough, the lack of beautiful single women, having more talented peers, or not liking being treated like a child by his superiors. He would quit easily for reasons I couldn't even fathom. No matter how many times I tried to convince him, it fell on deaf ears. Exhausted, I stopped contacting him altogether. When he was a child, it was one thing, but now that he was an adult, he had to take responsibility for his own life. Similarly, he never contacted us except to ask for money. And when I stopped giving him money, the contact stopped abruptly. Around the time we stopped bringing up Vernon in conversation, the now 27-year-old, he suddenly showed up at our house. And he brought a pregnant woman with him. "I got married. Lucia is pregnant now," he announced. "Married? When?" I asked. Apparently, they had been married for a year already. Neither Abel nor I had heard anything about it, and all we could do was give him a suspicious look, wondering why he was telling us now. "Actually, I quit my job. And Lucia needs to take maternity leave soon, so we're worried about making ends meet. So, He looked at us hesitantly, grinning sheepishly when our eyes met. Rather than feeling joy about Vernon getting married or having a grandchild, a sense of resignation welled up inside me first. Of course, it was about money. but I slowly shook my head from side to side. I'm sorry, but I can't help you out. My father's health is deteriorating, so I'll be staying at my parents' house to take care of him for the time being. Abel will stay at our place, but not indefinitely, I told him. At my words, "What?" Vernon let out a stunned. The truth was, my father had been diagnosed with cancer and was already in the terminal stages, according to the doctors. To fulfill my father's wish to spend his final days at home rather than undergoing painful life-prolonging treatments, I was planning to move back to my childhood home alone. So I made it clear in advance that I wouldn't be able to support the two of them at home or help with Lucia's childbirth itself. Vernon and Lucia also hung their heads heavily and offered their prayers for my father. I realized it was all an act and an appeal to me in less than a month. Shortly after I returned to my parents' house, I received a message from Abel. Vernon and his wife have been staying at our house all the time. The baby is constantly crying, and it's tough. Apparently, after I left, Vernon and his family had moved in and were making themselves at home as they pleased. They asked Abel to take care of Lucia and the baby, but it didn't seem like Vernon was job hunting in the meantime. Because Vernon had repeated quitting jobs for selfish reasons too many times, his work history was a mess. Now that he was approaching 30, his chances of getting hired were pretty low. Yet, he wasn't enthusiastic about job hunting and only rarely went to take employment exams. So he was mostly doing short-term and day labor part-time jobs, but he apparently never gave any of that money to Abel for living expenses or rent. On top of that, he freely used the groceries and took baths as he pleased. Babies may cry for a living, but having them move in unexpectedly and hearing their cries every day and night made even Abel complain. However, the couple only insisted on how much money it takes to raise a child, showing no intention of paying and only taking photos of the baby together. There's just no helping it. I'd like to move in with you, but if Vernon and his family tag along, it'll be a nuisance to your dad, Abel said. I couldn't refute his words. If those two were using our rent-free home as their base, there was a high chance they would follow us if we moved out. As it was, they were already asking about my father's condition every day and inquiring about the renovations of my parents' house in detail. To begin with, both our home and my parents' house were old and not suitable for raising children, considering the surrounding facilities. While I was worrying that it would undoubtedly lead to trouble, my father finally passed away. A few days after the funeral, where relatives gathered together. It was when we were all sharing our thoughts about my father and considering our future plans. For some reason, Vernon was trying to attend the discussion about the inheritance. Why is Vernon here? Today's discussion is only for the heirs, right? My brother Laughlin questioned. What? I can't inherit anything? Vernon responded to Laughlin's question with a blank look on his face. Since Dad hadn't named Vernon in his will to leave him anything, we told him we would proceed according to the law as siblings. He let out an obvious sigh. Without a word of greeting, he left without even closing the door, making me involuntarily grimace. What's with his attitude? Laughlin said indignantly. I'm really sorry. I tried to calm my furious brother, but I felt the same way. Vernon, who had apparently been after Dad's inheritance, stopped asking about my parents' house and Dad's estate as soon as he learned he had no right to inherit. The discussion about dividing the inheritance was settled, and a few days passed. When I returned home for the first time in a while, it had changed so much that it felt like someone else's house. Abel looked exhausted, while only Vernon, his wife, and their child seemed full of energy. But I grew concerned about how thin my grandchild was. What? Isn't this child too skinny? Is everything okay? Oh, It's fine, the doctor mentioned it during checkups, but apparently the baby is just petite. Well, I haven't been eating very well, so I guess the baby isn't getting enough nutrition. Lucia laughed as if it were someone else's problem. I hurriedly started preparing meals. Since they weren't using formula and the baby wasn't old enough to start solid foods yet, it was meaningless if Lucia didn't eat properly. I diligently planned out menus, thinking my grandchild was innocent in all this. As a result, Vernon and his wife started staying just for the meals. They demanded this and that, claiming it was good for breast milk, but never paid a dime or showed any gratitude. The only solace was that my grandchild was getting plumper. I was fed up with Vernon, who was supposed to be an adult but left all the housework to me, and Lucia, who went along with it as if it were only natural. I tried to have discussions with them multiple times, telling them it was a burden, but they only responded with emotional arguments about how happy we must be to live with our grandchild. I was considering moving out to force them out when Vernon casually looked around the house and laughed. "Hey, where's Abel been lately? I thought Roseanne was back, but now Abel's gone. Weird, huh? Wait, don't tell me you're planning to divorce? If Roseanne leaves, we'll be in trouble for food, so don't do that." Seeing him blatantly look down on me and laugh, I glared at Vernon, suddenly feeling angry. Abel is just out and about preparing for the move and greeting people around our new place. And what do you mean, you'll be in trouble? How long do you plan on staying in this house? You're still job hunting, right? We'll be in trouble if you don't hurry up and find a job and a place of your own. Despite being told numerous times before, Vernon seemed shocked to be clearly told to leave and shifted his gaze around in distress. When I pressed him further, he slammed his hand on the table. "You don't have to be so harsh. You can only say that because you don't know how tough I have it. Parents are supposed to help their struggling son and grandchild, aren't they? Never holding down a stable job, forcibly moving in and making us prepare meals and baths, taking care of your child, and on top of that, not contributing to living expenses. Do you really think it's only natural for parents to support that kind of lifestyle? It's about time you gain some self-awareness as an adult." I retorted without hesitation, and Vernon abruptly stood up and stormed out of the room. I raised my voice at his back. "Abel and I are selling this house and moving in 6 months. You two better figure out what you're going to do by then." Perhaps surprised by those words, Vernon turned around and looked at me in shock. But maybe pressured by my intensity, he silently left the living room. Yet, when dinner time came, he ate every last bite with a scowl on his face as if he were angry. It was beyond my control. As Abel and I proceeded with moving preparations, Vernon seemed to realize we were serious. Only now did he tearfully tell us how much trouble it would be to lose the house and talk about work and income. But those words no longer touched my heart, and I steadily continued the preparations. Finally, the day came when we were packing up our belongings, counting down to the move. When I got home, Vernon and Lucia ran up to me in an annoyingly good mood. "You did it, Roseanne! I can't believe you found such a big house for us!" Vernon exclaimed. "Huh?" I thought suspiciously, wondering what on earth he was talking about. Vernon thrust a document in front of my face. It was a copy of the deed for a 0.1-acre single-family house. The moment I saw it, my face turned bright red with anger. "Why do you have that? You broke the lock and found it, didn't you? What's the big deal? Anyway, when are we moving? A 0.1-acre house must be huge, right?" That document was tucked away in a drawer of my desk in my room, not something that was left in the living room by mistake. I had purposely put it in a locked cabinet, afraid of Vernon entering my room, and yet here it was in Vernon's own hands. I hurried to my room and found that the keyhole of the drawer had been completely tampered with, forced open with brute strength. Upon closer inspection, other storage areas had been rummaged through as well, with drawers half open and items that should have been put away scattered about. No matter how much we lived together, this was absolutely unforgivable. I yelled at him, but Vernon just grinned sheepishly. "You thief! I've told you time and time again, I can't live with you anymore. I'm moving, but you can't live in that house. I absolutely refuse to live with you after moving. Take care of your own life." There you go again, saying things like that. Sure, this house is too small for the 5 of us. That's why you bought a bigger house, right? And yet you're saying stuff like this. Honey, don't talk to Roseanne like that. It's rude. But Roseanne, thank you so much. I explained over and over that the house wasn't meant for living in, but they wouldn't listen, asking why I had the rights to such a building if that was the case. It was hopeless. Vernon was preparing to go out in high spirits, and Lucia, holding their child, was following along excitedly. "Well, we're gonna go check out refrigerators and washing machines. If we find good ones, we'll write down the model numbers. Let's all go shopping together next time. See ya!" I was dumbfounded that they expected us to buy even those, but if they were going out, it was a chance. I quickly called Abel and told him again that there was no hope for them. After a deep, long sigh, he said we should move as soon as possible. Vernon and his family came back once late at night, but they were drunk and showed no signs of listening to me. They were convinced they could live with us in the new house, talking about the layout and where to put the appliances, no matter how many times I said we wouldn't be living together. The next day, Vernon and his family went out again, saying they were going to look at beds this time, heading to a store that sold large furniture. I threw all of Vernon's belongings into a rental storage unit and put the key in our home's mailbox. I left a handwritten note and sent an email to both of them, then locked up the house and left. It was 3 days later when I got a call from Vernon. "Hey Roseanne, what's going on?" I could hear the voices of confused men behind Vernon. "What about the 0.1 acre house? Why is there only this shabby shack?" At those words, it dawned on me. Geez, he was way too slow to catch on. "What do you mean? That's the only building there. I told you countless times, didn't I? That house isn't the kind of place a family can live in," I said. Vernon was still shouting, but gradually losing steam. I had repeatedly told Vernon and Lucia over and over again. They must have brushed it off as me being shy or something, gone to the site, seen the actual house, and finally realized it was true. But then why did you buy such a big plot of land? Oh, are you going to rebuild here? Then you should have said so from the start." "No, that's not it. You looked at the deed without permission, and you still don't get it? There should have been various things inside, like the inheritance distribution agreement. We didn't buy that land, we inherited it from grandfather." I could tell Vernon was at a loss for words on the other end of the line. I sighed and pressed my finger against my brow. Despite talking about it so many times, the fact that he really hadn't been listening gave me a headache. It was a plot of land grandfather had used for a home garden, and nearby there was only a shed for storing farming equipment and a small cabin with just a kitchen and bath for simple overnight stays. Even that had been left completely untouched while grandfather was fighting his illness, so by now, it was probably overgrown with weeds. More than anything, I told him, "If you looked at the deed, it should have been clearly written. Most of that wide expanse of land you see belongs to someone else's fields, so don't go doing anything reckless. Deeds don't use units like acres. So, to begin with, the idea of a 0.1-acre house was wrong from the start. Vernon had been silent for a while, but suddenly he began shouting.
"This is fraud! Roseanne tricked us! We don't even have a place to live now. Take responsibility!"
"Don't be ridiculous! I told you over and over, we can't live together anymore. It's not like I threw you out at the drop of a hat, right? I've talked about this countless times since grandfather passed away, and I've told you repeatedly that you're misunderstanding. You're the ones who wouldn't listen and just charged ahead on your own." As we yelled at each other, there was a rustling sound. And then Lucia's screaming voice could be heard immediately.
"I didn't hear that. Tricking us and kicking us out is too cruel. Our child is still little. What are you going to do about our livelihood? If you're getting rid of that house and not living here, that means you have a separate base of operations, right? Tell us right now, we're moving in with you." "I'm telling you, it's impossible. I absolutely refuse to live with you anymore. You're adults, and you even have a child. It's about time you walked your own path in life."
Then Vernon's voice rang out loudly.
"Dad! Put Dad on the phone!"
I was listening in. "Let me tell you, we can't live with you anymore. If we're around, you'll just scream and shout without doing anything for yourselves. That's why I won't tell you where our new place is, and we won't provide any support from now on. Even if it means not being able to see our grandchild, so be it. Please, just let us go." I could tell Vernon sharply inhaled at his strained voice. I gently patted his shoulder and called out to Vernon. "Let me tell you again, we won't be seeing you anymore. From now on, you two raise your child properly. To do that, you need to start by holding down a proper job. Take care of your health, all three of you."
"Wait, Mom!"
Before I could finish hearing those words, I moved my finger to the end call button on my smartphone. Then Lucia's scream echoed through the receiver.
"Unbelievable! Unbelievable! Hey, what are we going to do about our lives from now on? We somehow managed even when you weren't working because your parents were there. But what are we supposed to do with just the two of us now? If you had just looked at the documents properly, this wouldn't have happened."
"Huh? Don't blame it all on me. You saw those documents too and were happy together about the 0.1-acre house. Besides, you haven't been working at all either. Don't complain only to me." Hearing the couple's fight, I grew worried about my grandchild. But Abel quietly reached out his finger and pressed the end call button for me. Looking at the phone that instantly fell silent, we both let out a deep sigh. Abel had tried to continue supporting the two of them somehow, thinking it was his fault for spoiling Vernon, but it ended without any effect. But honestly, it probably wasn't Abel's fault. Him spoiling Vernon was when he was little, and at least while he was in college and right after graduating, he still kept in touch and had proper conversations with us. But then Vernon started repeating job changes for nonsensical reasons and hanging out only with online friends who encouraged those job changes, and it became unstoppable. This education is a parent's duty, but if it manifested after he became an adult, we can't take responsibility anymore. We patiently dealt with him many times, but if he deteriorated with a similar wife, there was nothing we could do. A few months passed as we thought we no longer had him or our grandchild. I was tending to grandfather's home garden and watering the vegetables when suddenly I heard a voice from behind me. I turned around to find a haggard Vernon standing there.
"Mom, please, help me!"
Vernon, who had become much thinner since the last time I saw him, started ranting at me as I remained silent. I got divorced from Lucia. I cheated on her. But it couldn't be helped, right? It was good that we found an apartment after that, but since then, all she ever talked to me about was work or money. She wasn't cute at all, and even when I told her to put our son in daycare and work, she only said she didn't want to because it was too much trouble. And then, there was this super cute girl at my new job. It's not my fault, right? I was working hard for my family, but that family didn't cherish me. I was so dumbfounded I couldn't even speak. I turned off the water from the hose and started cleaning up as I was. Vernon watched me as he continued throwing words at me, ignoring him.
When Lucia found out about the affair, she flew into a rage, demanding a divorce. She took our son, but then she started demanding hundreds of thousands in compensation and child support from me for the divorce trial over my cheating. Isn't that insane? Who does she think drove me to have an affair? Please, Roseanne, I don't have any savings, so please pay the consolation money. You have grandfather's inheritance, right? If that's not possible, sell this land.
Finally, my anger exploded at his unbelievable words, and I glared at him.
You're always talking about money, money. You and Lucia are the same, only ever talking about money. Why should I have to cover for your mess? If you had a woman you wanted to be with more than Lucia, you should have just gotten a divorce and then started a relationship. It's pathetic that you're talking as if you're the victim. Neither your dad nor I will do anything to help you. Even if you're going through a tough time, who would help a man who still relies on his parents and even tells them to give up their inheritance? No way! Your precious son is going through such a hard time, and you don't feel anything?
I do have feelings about it. The Vernon we raised with care has turned into such a good-for-nothing. But if we helped you here, you would just keep thinking that your parents will somehow take care of things when you're in trouble. We won't be around forever either. You need to take responsibility for your own messes. With that, I finished cleaning up and left the field. He persistently followed me, but he seemed to notice the people around us whispering and looking at him. The moment he heard words like police and report, he ran away crying. I immediately contacted Abel and told him to be careful around the area for a while. But he never came after that. Apparently, he was also fighting with his affair partner over consolation money and had no time for anything else. Once a year, we receive a photo of our grandchild from Lucia's parents. For now, it seems they are not lacking anything with the help of her parents, as the photos show the child growing up plump and healthy. It's a sad story, but our lives have become terribly calm since being freed from Vernon and his family. It has become peaceful. I regret that we couldn't kick Vernon out sooner because we were busy with grandfather's thing and moving. Now, our only hope is for our grandchild to live happily. Even today, I continue my life of going to see the vegetables in the home garden together with my husband.